What's up, everyone? We're back for another episode of Locked On Bucks with a familiar face and a familiar voice. Eric Nehm is here from The Athletic because we need to discuss the defense. I broke it down with Frank a little bit last week, and we asked about the three-point line. And then Charles Lee conveniently let us in to the Bucks' secret plans about the three-point defense. Eric has just wrote a story at The Athletic, so we're going to discuss that. And then also we will talk about other takeaways from training camp / preseason. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday and also find some other stuff over at ESPN. Like I said, alongside me from The Athletic, one of the founding fathers of the Locked On Bucks podcast and great friend of mine, Eric Nehm. It's a pleasure to have you back on. Last time you were on here, 90 minutes. We're not running 90 minutes today, but I'm just glad that I could be here.
Yeah, it is good to have you around. Last time Frank was the only one lucky enough to be in my virtual presence, I guess. Yes. I don't know what that is. But yeah, we're gonna knock this out. It's like old times. It's good to see you. I'm happy that you were able to do the World Cup down in Australia and Sydney. It looked great. The US won, so I'm happy. And yeah, we're in a good place.
Yeah, it was basically a free trip to Australia for a training camp for the US women. No one got particularly close, but it was fun to cover that. We do thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first listen or first watch of every day as well. But let's get into this story that you wrote. So as we discussed, Charles Lee, it kind of hinted to the fact that potentially the Bucks are going to look to limit the damage beyond the three-point line a little bit this season. And it was interesting because Bud spends the night. We know he's scooting around at the moment. I think he's still scooting around, maybe on crutches, but he was up in the suite. He wasn't on the sidelines. Charles Lee gets the pre- and post-game press conference duties, and he did just let slip a little bit, which is absolutely not something Bud would have let happen. So do you want to walk us through exactly how this all played out for those that haven't caught up? And perhaps before we get to it, from the business side of things, have you got a deal for anyone that wants to sign up to The Athletic? What do we got cooking at the moment?
Of course, $1 a month for new subscribers over at The Athletic. That'll be a 6-month offer. So you can come through and read the story that I wrote and, watch the video that I clipped and stuff like that. But always welcome. Hopefully people enjoy my work over there. It's always interesting. Everyone who follows the Bucks knows how secretive Bud is, right? Like, I have DFS players asking me the day of that first game, who are the starters, how much they're gonna play. It was like, come on, like Bud doesn't want to tell me the starters 90 minutes before the game. He's not going to give us a full-on readout. And that's just like how he is. He's very secretive. He always has been. And, over the years, sometimes in training camp, you find stuff out, right? Like, I had the story about the boxes the other year that we were able to do. And like Bud was not happy. Like he was like, come on, like this is supposed to be a secret. And I don't want it like out. And yeah, it was nice that Charles said that that's been like an emphasis for them, limiting 3-point attempts and stuff like that. And, as soon as I told Bud, obviously I was smiling because I was happy that I knew some information. And he immediately was like, he lied. No. And like, we just started laughing. And eventually, he did like go into it. And I don't know, it's really interesting to me because, no matter what you think of the defense, and honestly, when I dropped the story, it was a celebratory tone from Bucks Twitter, right? Like everyone was like, "This is amazing." It isn't necessarily just going to work. Like when there is a reason that they used to do what they used to do, right? Like there's a reason why they run drop coverage. There's a reason why you have Brook Lopez on the floor. There's a reason why you have Giannis doing his thing. And there's a reason why you ultimately make drives in getting to the rim as tough as possible. It's the most efficient shot. Even though threes are more popular, like dunks and layups are the most efficient shots. So the Bucks went out of their way to make that as hard as possible. And it's worked overwhelmingly. And, it was funny. I had someone who asked me to, in my story, I put like, hey, in 3-point attempts per game from your opponent for the last 4 years, the Bucks were 30th, 28th, and 30th. And in that time, their defensive rating was first, 9th, and then 15th. And, somebody asked me like, oh, could you do it for the postseason? And I said, sure. I don't really like looking at postseason stats like in that way, because it's just, it's not super useful, right? Like everyone plays different teams in the playoffs. You play a different amount of games. It's not like the best marker of anything, because it's an unequal sample and it's a small sample. But anyways, like they asked me to run it for the playoffs. And when you look at kind of what they do in the playoffs, they've been very good, right? Like, so they give up all these threes, and in the playoffs, they give up a ton of threes too. In the playoffs, first in defensive rating in 2018-19, fourth in defensive rating in 2019-20, which again was a year where, the defense was broken against the Heat and they were terrible and all that. In 2021, first in defensive rating, and last year, first in defensive rating. So even as, the Bucks were getting destroyed by the Celtics, they were still the best defense in the playoffs. And I do think like that shouldn't be, kind of ignored. But the Bucks defense itself is very good, and it has been for many years. More often than not, when they've lost in the playoffs, it's been the offense. The offense hasn't been good enough. And obviously, if you watch the Bucks long enough, you've seen Jrue Holiday miss a bunch of shots. You've seen Chris Middleton miss a bunch of shots. You've seen Giannis at times struggle. He doesn't really do that anymore because he's so good. But you've seen all those things, and I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see, because it does seem like it's not a full like wholesale change defensively. It does feel like, hey, if you're a help defender, stay closer to your guy, but not like the backside help at the rim, where that's Brook Lopez, where that's Giannis. Those guys are still going to be doing that. It's like if you're on the wing, don't try to dig in and make them make a pass. Like, just let Jrue handle it, or just let Grayson handle it, or just let Chris handle it. Like, just let the defender on the ball handle the on the ball responsibilities. And I do think it's going to be really interesting to kind of watch and see if it works, because it could not work.
So I think the idea of experiment, and we've seen this a little bit. So go back to 2021 where they did win the title. Everyone was happy. Everyone was excited because the Bucks were trying some different things during the regular season. And that was the first year where you lost the stability of, well, this is just the best defense in the regular season. But everyone was cool with it because it meant that you were trying different things.
Right.
Last year, if you look at the numbers, I mean, you can point to a number of different things, but very clearly losing Brook Lopez for 70 games, despite the fact in some circles he's remained maligned because of the defensive scheme, right. You can point to that. So I'm cool with the idea that the Bucks are going to try different things, but to your point, there might be some issues along the way or other areas of the floor where they haven't given up points that are going to be problematic. Maybe there's more fouling because you don't have the help there. So we can get into that in a little bit. But before we do, I want to ask you about what they did in the championship run, because you wrote about this a little bit in the story. And I do think that it's glossed over a little bit of how the Bucks actually defended throughout that playoff run. You spoke about how they've been really dominant in the postseason defensively, even last year, despite the fact everyone remembers Game 7 and all the threes. So we'll get to that. I'll talk about BetOnline first, though. I got some odds sent through to me about the most improved player of 2022-2023, and I was looking down the list, and I was like, okay, well, where's the Bucks players? Is there any Bucks players that are going to come up here? Unfortunately not. In about the top, let's say, I've got a list of about 80 players here, I think, and there's no Bucks on this list. But if you are interested in most improved player at betonline.net, Anthony Edwards is the favorite. Tyrese Halliburton's there. Jalen Brunson, the star of the New York Knicks, is there as well. So go check out the most improved player odds at betonline.net, which is your number one source. Also for football betting info this season. I believe the Packers are playing in London this week. I think that's what I saw. Mm-hmm. So if you think that they're going to get that win, go to BetOnline and check all the lines, the odds, everything else to do with that game. They've also got MLB, MMA, boxing, golf as well. So head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. We have a season preview also coming up, Eric. So as we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks their first listen every day, check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview starting on October 10. A 6-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NBA season. The local team experts and NBA insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey, they're all combined into one ultimate NBA preview. That's starting October 10. So check that out wherever you get your podcasts. I'm pretty sure that'll be on YouTube as well. So go check it out. We're in there. The Bucks are there. They're in the contenders preview, as you would suspect. So what did they do in the 2021 playoffs, Eric, in terms of defense? Because there's always this idea that, well, just play Giannis at the 5, play small ball. You win. You can't lose. Switch everything. So what did they do with Brook Lopez? Because I think looking back, you'll see that he was a significant part of what they were able to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where this new emphasis is going to be interesting, because I think you can kind of see some of the seeds of that in that playoff run, right? So the first round to me was pretty simple, right? Like they're going up against the Heat. In the previous postseason, they did not put Giannis on Jimmy Butler. This time they're like, all right, Giannis on Jimmy Butler. That's what we're going to do. So, you had Giannis on Jimmy, Brook on Bam. They both played a million feet off of them and said, all right, do your thing. Like if you want to try to hit jumpers, go for it. And again, I know the drop coverage is much maligned, and that's always what we end up talking about. But that was pure drop. It was dropped the whole way. Like essentially, they kept everyone on those positions. Even with PJ Tucker around, I know the king of the switch and the guy that coached the defense that year. With him, they were still in straight up drop. And I mean, the only thing that they're doing right is Chris Middleton's chasing around the best shooter. Those things won't change this year. So that was the first round. Second round, you're going up against Kevin Durant. The biggest headline, the biggest argument was PJ Tucker screaming at us. And I say us, like the media members, because it was during a press conference. He's screaming about how the team needs to stop helping him so much. Like he doesn't need help. Just let me take Kevin Durant. No one else help. Don't let him hurt us as a passer. Like I got him. Like he's going to put up 40. That's what he does. He's Kevin Durant. He's the greatest scorer we've ever seen, or whatever PJ's speech was. I think I might have hit that word for word. But like that was the thing. Like don't help so much. But Brook Lopez was still in the game. Brook Lopez was still playing drop coverage. They did bring it up a little bit higher on the floor. He's giving a little bit more pressure onto Durant. But, you go back and watch that game. NBA TV had Game 7 on the other, I don't know, sometime last week. And I was watching it. And, I mean, Brook Lopez is in there. PJ Tucker in the fourth quarter and overtime is in foul trouble. They can't play him that much. Connaughton is in instead. Middleton's over on Durant. Like they are essentially doing all those things, and it's Brook Lopez in drop coverage. He has one of the biggest blocks of the game in drop coverage against Kevin Durant, kind of coming out of nowhere and blocking that shot. So again, everyone wants, as you said, small ball, switch everything. Overwhelmingly in that playoff run, the Bucks did it. I'm not trying to say that they didn't, right? Like they did have small ball lineups and they did kind of do well in those moments, but overwhelmingly, like Brook Lopez was still on the floor. So you go to the Hawks series, Trae Young drops in a million floaters in that first game. And it's like, oh man, drop coverage is really dead now. Like there's no way that they can keep doing this. And then they changed the help defense on the wings. They, were a little bit more active in those places. And eventually they were just in drop coverage until Game 5 when Brook and everyone switched and it threw the Hawks for a total loop. Like they weren't really sure what was going on because they didn't expect it. So again, nice surprise, but overwhelmingly it isn't switch everything. It's like playing around with the help. And then, you go to that Suns series, Suns go up 2-0. They decided to start switching around the defensive matchups. Who's Jrue Holiday covering? Who's PJ Tucker covering? But again, you're still in the drop coverage. But in that series, it's changing the help, right? Those first couple games in Phoenix, it's a bunch of corner threes. It's Mikal Bridges just going wild. Like it's all the others, and it's all the stuff that the Bucks have, are kind of working on right here, right? Like by changing the help, then all of a sudden you don't give those shots up. So I do think when you look back at that run, I know because PJ Tucker was on the team, there's always a thought that, like, they were switching everything. It was small ball all the time. And it really wasn't. Like, it was Brook Lopez doing some of these other things and their help defenders doing some of these other things, which is, to me, kind of why you see what they're doing, or at least planning on trying to do here. Obviously, we only got to see one game against 9 through 20 on the Grizzlies roster. So, like, we don't have, like, a great idea of exactly what it'll look like. But as we're looking for it, I think you can kind of see some of those things in that playoff run from 2 years ago when they won the championship.
Yeah, and this is why you need to read the story on The Athletic, because there's also clips there. There was a clip from the Grizzlies game. So I just looked up the box score from Game 7 while you were talking there. So I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, so it might be pointless trivia, but how many minutes do you think Brook played out of the, 53?
53. I'm going to say like 32. I don't know.
I mean, it's a staggering number. Over 46 minutes.
It's crazy.
So, and admittedly, like, you look at that lineup and you say, okay, well, they had Kevin Durant. So maybe if they had another ball handler, even just Kyrie Irving, maybe that changes the calculus, or it probably does change the calculus. Yeah. But still, 47 minutes is extreme. So one of the other clips you had in your story, if you really want just to illustrate or have a look at what the Bucks were doing in that Celtics series, for instance, there was one clip where it was Grayson Allen. I believe he was guarding Derek White. Mm-hmm. I think it was Jason Tatum that had the ball. And the Bucks were just like, straight up, we don't want Jason Tatum going one-on-one with anyone, even if it is Jrue Holiday. So Grayson Allen just completely sells out, just runs at Tatum like a maniac.
Yeah.
And it's just the simplest of passes. Derek White knocks down the open three. So that's why people are frustrated about the three-point defense, which I totally get. I think that also by the time you get to Game 7 of a Celtics series that was brutal, there was probably other factors. There was fatigue. Yeah. There was all these types of things that played into this. But the idea of staying at home a little bit more on other players does make some sense. I saw a tweet. You put the numbers up in terms of opponent three-point field goal attempts against the Bucks. I saw a tweet this morning just by chance that just had the rising three-point rate across the league. And I think this year is it will be, because it's going to go up. Will be the first year that across the league, it's above 40% of field goal attempts at threes. So it has changed even in the time that Bud's been here, where maybe there were some guys 4 years or 5 years ago that wouldn't just take the shot, but now they're all taking the shot and they're all kind of fine at it or can hit an open three. So it's all changed. The calculus has all changed. So what are you concerned about in terms of if they really do lean into this?
I think overwhelmingly over the years, everyone always thinks about, they just give up so many threes. So that means all of the great 3-point shooters surely had massive games against the Bucks. No, they never do, because the Bucks do focus on that. Like, if you're a very good shooter, they are going to stay connected and they are going to play maybe similarly to the way that they're going to do help defense this year.
It's the stinking Grant Williams of the world.
Correct. Like, it's always going to be, you're probably above average-ish, but not elite guys, typically taking above the break threes. Sometimes you get a swing for a corner three. Like, those are the shots that you're giving up, and you're giving them up to role players. So Bucks fans over the years, if I had to watch a lot of role players have the best games of their career and be like, why is Sadiq Bey going crazy against the Bucks, or whoever may be? Like, those are just the things that happen. I do have some concern that if you stop helping out on those guys as much, if you stop giving stars that much attention, one, like you said, foul trouble. Like, Jrue Holiday gets a great whistle. He gets a lot of respect from officials. But also, if he just has to take guys by himself, there's the potential that he gets a couple ticky-tack fouls, and then all of a sudden you've lost Jrue Holiday for, who knows, 15 minutes of that game. And that's not ideal. So you go from there. Maybe Jrue Holiday is even more tired, right? We've seen how tired he gets in the playoffs when he's playing real defense against people. The shot goes, right? Like, he only has so much energy in his body. So you're going to have him, exerting that on the defensive end. So I think you have some of that. And then also, you might just have stars go off more often. that's something overwhelming that doesn't really happen against the Bucks. It's typically not the guy. The guy doesn't do the thing. Embiid's had some big games over the year, but like typically if it's like a big wing or it's a good point guard, like they're not the guy to do it. And I do wonder if there's some of that. And then honestly, this could just be a massive ask for Brook Lopez. And everyone who's familiar with my work knows how much I appreciate what Brook Lopez does on the defensive end. I think I've tried to help Bucks fans over the years understand it a little bit better. Like, hey, this dude's actually really good defensively. And obviously you saw him rewarded with an all defensive team a few years back. Like, I do think this is a lot for him. Like, this is going to be a big ask. Like the clip that you referenced also just has Jrue Holiday and Brook Lopez covering a pick and roll by themselves. And as it's happening, it's just Brook, man. There's no one else there. Like, you're looking at the roll man. There's not a tag from a backside guy. And I think over the years, what you've seen is, yes, Brook Lopez does a great job at the rim. Yes, Giannis does a great job at the rim. But typically those drives aren't easy to begin with. Like, the first step of that potential scoring possession isn't easy. Now it's easier. Okay, what if they have a full runway? Full runway to go up at Brook Lopez 10 times a game rather than a shortened runway or a tough move before that. Like, the Bucks have been very good at putting Brook and Giannis in a good place to succeed at the rim. And those two are great rim protectors. I don't want to undersell just how good they are. They're fantastic at it. But the Bucks have put them in a position to succeed. And I do wonder if you see some of that. So I think there's real concerns here. Like, the NBA has so much talent. The players are so skilled at this point that you just can't take away everything. That's not how this works. There's very few teams over the years that have ever been able to do that. And now the Bucks are potentially, to turn the knob up over here on help defense, you got to turn the knob down on, making drives more difficult or whatever it may be. So I do think, you're watching the levers at play here. Those are kind of my concerns. Do you share them? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think as I try and talk, I think the question will be, particularly with these role players, if you've given them wide open threes in the past, can you turn them into semi-contested threes, which probably impacts the percentage that they're able to shoot? I think the other thing that is going to be interesting, you talk about the quick fouls potentially on a Jrue Holiday, those types of players. I think there's not too many things that make Bud as red in the face as foul trouble sending the opposition to the free throw line. So I think the Bucks have done a pretty good job of understanding, okay, well, what are the shots that we want to give away? And they've done a good job of it. But as the numbers continue to tilt towards the 3-point line, you do have to adjust a little bit. But at the same time, you don't want to become a team that's giving up points in the paint. You don't want to be a team that's sending teams to the free throw line, because I think we've seen with the personnel that the Bucks have, it's been perfect. And this is why you can't just plug in Bobby Portis last year. And I thought he did a fine job.
Yeah.
He had a really good season, but he's not Brook Lopez. So that's why this season, it does feel like, and we've spoken about Brook Lopez a fair bit and his contract status and what's going to happen. This is a really big year that you really want to cash in if you can, because there's probably going to be significant change. And again, for as much as he's been maligned because of the scheme, there's only one Brook Lopez, and you can't just replace him, particularly with how the Bucks got him and how it all played out. And then you probably are going to have to significantly change your defense. So I just think it's a big year. I understand why they want to test some things out in the regular season. It makes sense to me. I don't think it's necessarily going all out to stop the 3-point shot. But yeah, maybe if it's just a half a step, a full step closer to those shooters. I know you again posted another clip where they were really sticking to a bunch of randoms on the Grizzlies. And, that's a nice little clip to see, because it's just not what we've seen in the past. But I'm curious to see what happens if they're playing a really good team and things don't go well straight away. Do they just go back to the way they've defended, which I don't think you could have a problem with. But I'm fascinated for the first night where they give up 30 plus free throws or they give up 50 points in the paint, because that's going to be a real test.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny too, talking with Bud. Like, my question typically tends to be like, if you're making changes, like, how deeply are all of those habits like pushed into your system?
Yeah.
And that's been 3 years of it, right? Like, for 3 years, they've done pretty much the exact same thing defensively. And I was like, okay, well, you've had a training camp, which is, a couple weeks. You probably had some open gyms before that. So a couple weeks before that. And in my head, I was like, okay, well, where are those old habits? Like, how have they died? Has it been difficult for them? Like, and he's like, well, if we do some of the stuff that made us a good defense on mistake still, that's still not that bad. We were in a good place defensively before this. And I didn't mean it to come off offensively, right? Like, oh my God, it'd be terrible if you did like the old thing. But Bud, like, you could tell, felt it, right? Like, this is a defense that obviously he's been very passionate about. They've been one of the best defensive teams in the league since he's been here. So he cares about this a lot. Like, there's no way that, this decision came easily. Like, it was not something where it was like, yep, we're doing it. Like, no, like, there's a lot of discussion that went into this. So I'm curious, it is helping out on a Jason Tatum drive and leaving Grant Williams in, December. Is that a benchable kind of thing? Like, if you do it, is it like, all right, sit down. Like, that's not how we do it anymore. Like, how do you kind of do this? Like, how do you get those habits and how quickly does it happen? So yeah, it's going to be very interesting, right? We've seen a very similar defensive, kind of style and scheme for 3 years. And now they've tweaked it a little bit. I think overwhelmingly people are going to see a lot of the exact same, right? Like, the rim defense is still going to be extremely good. They're probably still going to give up some threes. You can't take them all out because people, as you mentioned, are shooting so many of them every night that, there's probably still going to be some open threes. But how does this all work? I think it'll be super interesting to watch.
I think having such a veteran team helps as well. These guys are, really across the board smart players. And it's not so much, and if you know Bud and the way he's coached over the course of his career, you'll understand it's not abandoning the past as much as it is adding a string to the bow. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch. One quick one before we wrap it up. I think I saw a photo of this. You mentioned the blue boxes before. Is there like a 4-point line now? What's going on?
Yeah, there is a 4-point line. And I mean, again, so kind of how this job works, right, is, the Bucks have a very long practice and then we're allowed in for essentially the least interesting parts of practice. Like, they still need to shoot free throws. They still need to, finish off their shooting drills. And that's what we're allowed in for. And I mean, I thought it was really interesting. The Bucks for years have shot really deep threes in practices, right? Like, those blue boxes aren't on the line. They're behind them. Like, it's a couple feet behind them. So they've always shot from deep. But no, on the, so it's the court. So it's like the shooting guard court, like the players get broken up into different areas. So like court 4 is the bigs, and this basket is the shooting guard types. And it was, I mean, Jrue Holiday, Pat Connaughton, George Hill, Grayson Allen. And so the boxes are on the floor, but then behind it is a line that goes all the way behind it. And they were shooting from behind that line. And I mean, those are deep threes. Like, the Bucks shoot deep threes, and those are insanely deep threes. Like, there was a drill where they're pulling up from half court at that line. Like, it was like, all right, one dribble from half court, get to the line, shoot. And I'll be honest, they weren't making a lot. And again, it was like the end of practice. I'm sure tired legs, all of that. So like, I could get it, but in my head, I was like, is this even a good idea? Like, I'm all for, exploring new space on the floor, getting even more spacing for Giannis. That's a good idea. But like, should everybody be doing it? Like, okay, maybe like Grayson shoots a lot of deep threes. He's good at it. Pat's got the strength for it. Maybe he should. Should everybody else? Probably not. So I'll be very interested to see like how that actually comes into play. I mean, early in the preseason opener against the Grizzlies, you saw Grayson take like a pull-up 3 from a couple feet behind the line. Like, in my head, I was like, okay. He was kind of practicing that in that drill. It wasn't as deep as he was taking in that drill, but it's like, is it more transition threes? Is it earlier threes? Is it okay, take one step further back than you had been in previous years, so you can give Giannis that much more space and pull the defense out that much. I don't know. It's the success rate of the threes as I was watching them made me think like, maybe this experiment isn't gonna like be a good one and it'll get like tossed out, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's there has to be a severe drop in the numbers. I would have to think, and also George Hill is going to throw his neck back out if he keeps shooting from all the way back there. I mean,
it's going to be brutal. Yeah,
look after your guys. All right, check out. Tell you what, struggling with my voice today. Apologies, but check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast with me good mate Josh Lloyd. If you're getting ready for your fantasy basketball season, he'll have you covered with drafts, roster moves, sleepers. He knows it all. Honestly, it's insane how much work that guy does. So check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. Eric, we will chat through the season, I would believe, anytime. Well, you drop regularly good stories, but the particularly interesting ones is when I'll be hassling you. What's the deal again? So what do people have to do?
Literally just click on one of my stories. If you're not a subscriber, you'll get the first 3 paragraphs, and then all of a sudden it'll give you a chance to subscribe. And if you're a new subscriber, it'll just be $1 a month for 6 months. Like there's no like code you have to put in or anything. Like literally just click on one of my stories, scroll down till it tells you, hey, do you want to subscribe, and you get a pretty sweet deal. Like $1 a month is cheap.
And as I said, the clips are good in these stories. Keeps you engaged. You're reading it, but perhaps you can't quite understand it. The clips will be there, and you can see it as well. So it's really good stuff. So check that out. Like I said, we'll have Eric on through the season when he gets time. But we're fortunate here because no trip to Abu Dhabi for Eric. Yeah. So he's going to be watching these next 2 games from the couch. We'll have a post-game pod tomorrow. I believe that's an 11 a.m. tip. Eric is Central Time.
Yep, yes. Sure is.
Bucks and Hawks, another game over the weekend. So we'll try to get a couple of pods going there as well. Eric, always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Also, a note, NBA TV only for Bucks fans tomorrow. So if you're trying to watch it on Bally or don't have NBA TV, you're going to have to find, I don't know, an NBA app, maybe the Bucks app will have it. I don't know. But it is not on Bally tomorrow.
All right. 3 a.m. for me. So we're undecided whether I'm going to watch that one live. We'll have a podcast tomorrow, though. As I said, I'll drag Frank on, see what he's got to say about what happens in Abu Dhabi. So we'll speak to all you guys tomorrow.